Hey, and welcome. We're going to take a look at the Pro Tools Smart Tool today, the different tools that are in it and how they might apply to a mix. So the mix we're going to listen to is called Jericho. This is the studio version that my good friend Joey Summers wrote. So what is the Smart Tool? Well, the Smart Tool is this little puppy right up here. It consists of a trimmer tool, the selector tool, and the grabber tool. And when we're all together, there's also a secret little fade tool that happens. How about just turning it on and off real quick? So real quick, if you hit F6, as long as your function keys are in the correct mode, which you would go to, let's do that. So function keys have to be in the correct mode. So you can open up system preferences. This is all extra. You're going to hit your keyboard on a Mac, and then you're going to click the button that says use F1, F2, etc. keys as standard function keys. So that's important to have. Otherwise, if you don't have that, this won't work. So if you don't have that clicked, this is not going to work. So F6 is going to select the trimmer tool. Let's get it back to the default. F7, the selector. F8, the grabber. And if you hit any combination of those two keys at the same time, it's going to select them all. I usually just slap them. There we go. So any two keys will select them all at the same time. So if you hit F6 and F8 at the same time, it selects them all. F6 and F7 at the same time seems to work a bit better. F7 and F8 at the same time works nice too. Okay, well, what's the trimmer tool? Let's just take a look at some examples that we can use for the trimmer tool. This is the song right here. So if I just take that out of input monitoring, and if we take a listen, so there's a little bit of space before the song actually starts. There's a little bit of dead space right there. So we could take the trimmer tool, and if the smart tool is enabled, so F6, F7, or click up here, the smart tool is enabled. When you go to the bottom edge, it automatically turns into that trimmer tool, which is really neat. If you go, so I can select that whole clip. These are all called clips. And if I hit the right arrow button, it's going to go to the end of the clip. So if I go to the end of a clip on the bottom edge, it's going to flip that trimmer tool around. So left goes to the start of a clip once it's selected, and right goes to the end. And depending on where you are, it's going to flip the trimmer tool around. Now here's a modifier key. If you hold down Option, it flips the trimmer tool the other way. Okay, so no Option key, bottom corner, trimmer. Option key flips it. So Option is a good modifier key. It's like the opposite. Okay, so one way to the other way. Think of it that way. So I could just take this clip. I want everyone to notice I'm in grid mode right now. So I'm in grid mode. This is my grid, all these lines right here. If I turn the grid off, and Pro Tools located right here, the grid disappears. And in grid mode wouldn't really matter. Oh, it does matter. In grid mode, we can see this session differently. Right now I'm looking in eighth notes. So every one of these lines represents an eighth note. And then you get to this dark line, and those represent whole notes. So there's going to be 8 of these lines before it hits there. If I change to quarter notes, now I have 4 lines, and then I hit the start of the next bar. So I'm going to look at eighth notes, and when I'm in grid mode, notice how with the trimmer tool, I'm just sliding over, and it's popping it up by eighth notes, okay, because that's what my grid is selected. So if I change that to quarter notes, now it's going to move by quarter notes. And notice I cannot go in between, okay? So here's your first shortcut with the trimmer tool when in grid mode. And I like to edit in grid mode, but when I want to turn that grid mode off, but I don't want to go click the button or hit tilde, look at the tilde change in the grid mode. If I don't even want to do that, hold down Command, and it breaks the grid mode, and we go to relative grid mode. And this is what I typically do. I stay in grid mode, but anytime I need to break it, I hold down Command. Okay? So right now, this is a good example of when we might use the trimmer tool. So we trimmed the first top of this track because there was no music. And now the song starts a little bit quicker. Cool. All right, so let's move on to the next smart tool. Now I do want maybe, let's go back to trimmer for a second. I just want you to see there are 3 iterations of the trimmer tool. We're just talking about the standard right now, and we'll get to the other ones later. All right, so smart tools back on. I just clicked on the top half of that. There's like a little line break there. Okay, now we're going to go over to the selector tool. So when might we use the selector tool? Let me think of a reason why we might use a selector tool. Oh, okay, I can think of something. This is great. So here we have some claps. Okay. And if I solo these up, and by solo, I mean boop, solo. Cool. Right here, for instance, this clap I turn down. So this, we can look at the wave versions of the claps right here, or I can hit the minus key and I can see the volume. This is a good example of when I might use the selector tool. For example, right here, I just grabbed this clap and I turned it down. So I may want to grab another clap and turn them down, or a clap and turn them up. So I will select the clap. And once I have it selected, if I go to the top half of the clip, it turns into the trimmer tool, but upside down. So with that, I can grab the volume of that clap and I can turn it up. So now it sounds like this. And before it sounded like this. So a little quieter. So I'm just hitting Command Z and Shift Command Z. Cool. So let's hear that in the old mix. And before, remember, it was like this. So you don't really hear the clap that much, and now you hear it. Cool. The selector tool selects things. So we can select waveforms, we can select volume automation, we can do a bunch of things. But the bottom line is the selector selects stuff, okay? So we have just done a great job selecting a clap. Okay, so that's, we did trimmer, we did selector, and it turned into a hybrid trimmer, and that was kind of neat. Now we want to talk about, what's the next doodad up there? It's a grabber tool. Now, notice in the trimmer it had 3 iterations. The selector was just a selector. That's all it had. But the grabber also has 3, and by default it's the time. So it's under time. We're going to talk about time today, and we're going to talk about separation. So these 2 tools. Probably where I use the grabber the most is actually to copy and paste things. So right here I have a kick sample. And I have one right here. So I am going to say that didn't exist. So I deleted that clip. So let's have a listen to the kick sample that I have. Okay. Let's have a listen to them over here. Here it comes again. So what's happening there is underneath these kick drums, I have kick drum layered. And every time the kick drum hits, just to add a little bit more top end to it, I'm adding this sample. Okay. And it sounds like that. Now, what I did when I built this out is I wrote this clip in. I wrote this MIDI. This is a MIDI note. It's in expand. Okay, that's what it looks like. And I can hit Control equals to get out of there, or Control equals to open up the MIDI window. And we have expand, and expand is a sampler. Expand, I can load sounds into expand. There's a whole bunch of sounds, and this one looks like this. So it's got, and all these are on. So I've got a kick selector. I got a whole bunch of stuff that I'm using here, but in the end, I'm just using this one sound, and it sounded like that. Cool. It sounds That's what it sounds like, and I'm layering it with the kicks. So once I have this in my session, I can select it with the grabber. Cool, so notice the grabber right there. Hold down Option, and I'm going to drag it right over here. That's what I use the grabber for the most, is copying and pasting things. Are there different ways to copy and paste? Sure. I could just select it with the grabber. So one click with the grabber on a clip selects the whole clip. So if I click with the grabber, it takes the whole clip. Okay. If I double click with the grabber, this is neat, I can name the clip. So I named this kick Bob. So now this kick is named Bob. Okay. That's actually helpful to find it later on. I would probably not name it Bob. I'd probably name it Great Sounding Kick, and then I could find that kick and place it in different spots. Another time. So back to this. So you could just hit Command C, just like you're in Microsoft Word or Pages, whatever you're up to. Command V is going to paste it in, but what I do, it just ends up being quicker, is I just Option drag with the grabber tool. Okay, so that's one use of the grabber tool. I want to highlight this again. One click selects the clip. Okay. If I do that with the selector, notice how the bottom half of the clip is the grabber and the top half is the selector. And if I click twice with the selector, it selects the clip. But if I click 3 times with the selector, it selects the entire track. Okay. Ooh. Ooh. Bum, bum, bum. Okay. So we did trimmer, we did the selector, we did grabber, but so I was going to touch on some separation with the grabber and separation. So notice if I hit F8 twice, it turns into this grabber with the scissor. That's the separation. So if we just right click on that, that's what's selected. So if you hit F8, it will toggle through these 3 different iterations of the grabber tool. So right now I have the separation tool selected. Oh, but I want my smart tool on. So this is where this comes in handy, I find. Mostly I'm going to use this for separating the breaths of a lead singer or of a group singing. And I can quickly separate and I can put it on another track. So if I want to remove all the breaths and make them their own track, so I could just get the breaths sounding pretty consistent and maybe put some compression on there, some EQ, and reverb them in a certain way so you don't have all these different kinds of breaths. That's the way to do it. So let's come over here. We got Joey. I'm actually going to separate it from this track, and I'm going to throw it up on a track that's muted right now. So this track is muted. So it's grayed out, which means it's not being played. And this is the volume view, and we're going to look at the waveform. So I'm just hitting minus to toggle between those. All right, so let's see if we can get Joey breathing at some point, and we're going to separate that. Let's see if I let him breathe. Here we go.
I'd been running, all my tears were falling, ran from...
Cool. All right. So here is a breath. And if we zoom in, we can use ERT, maybe make our clips just a little bit bigger. There is the breath right here. Okay, so let's take a listen to that so everyone can kind of see it.
Ran from...
So this breath is actually pretty good, which is why I probably didn't end up making a track for it. But I want to break the grid mode. Remember, hold down Command, and I'm going to grab this breath, which starts and stops there, and I go to the bottom, and notice how that grabber turns into the separation grabber. And I click, and I drag it. So if I had the regular grabber, so let's go back here, and I'll just take the object grabber. So this is the standard grabber. If I grab this, it takes the whole thing and moves it. That's not good. So here we go. We got object grabber. We're going to turn our smart tool back on. Just hold those in for a bit. I'm going to hit Command to break the grid. And now I'm going to grab this and I'm going to move it up. That's what I use the grabber tool the most for. It's very helpful, especially when doing stuff like this, when you want to split stuff really quick. So now we have this.
ran from my past from long
And if I soloed this channel as well, so we can hear the breath.
ran from my past from long ago.
So now I could go in and I could remove the rest of the breaths all throughout the track. I could easily take a couple breaths and use those and sample them across the track as well if I wanted to be super consistent and have a really, really tight vocal. That's one instance of using that tool. Okay, so we've ripped through a couple things, but we do want to talk about fade tools. So let's talk about them fade tools. So with the Smart Tool turned on, I'm going to zoom in a little bit. If I go to the top corner of any clip, notice how it turns into that fade. If I go to the bottom corner of any clip, it's still like the trimmer. But top corner and the bottom corner is going to come in handy in a little bit. So top corner, I can fade, and notice how after I faded, it goes right to the grid line. Typically, I don't want to do that. So I'm going to hold down Command. So I'm going to break the grid, and then I'm going to fade in. If you don't do fades, you end up getting a lot of pops and snaps. Even in this recording, I'm sure I can find one, any fades I missed. So now this will smoothly fade in.
I'd been running,
No
all my
pops.
tears were falling.
And you can fade out. So if I go to the end of a clip, so I select the clip, selector, one click, I hit the right arrow, I go to the top corner on the other side, and that's a fade. Okay, so this is the quickest way to fade. And with the Smart Tool on, that's available. With the Smart Tool off, it isn't. Okay, so let's go in between two clips. So here are two clips. One clip, two clip, three clip. I can select one of these clips. I go to the bottom, and notice how it turns in. This is like a double side. So there's a fade up top. You see how it's shaved, shaded. It doesn't shave. It's shaded with a dark and light color. And on the bottom, it's like a mix of the two. So the bottom is a crossfade. So if I go to the top, I can fade this one out, and then I can fade that one in. Okay, so I'm fading out, I'm fading in. Now, if I go to the bottom, I can hold it in, and it creates this crossfade. So let's take a look at that, and it's a little bit different. You can double click on all these fades, and you can change the type of fades that they are. Equal power, equal gain, or none, and we'll get into that another time. It defaults to equal power. So we'll do another one over here between these two clips. That's a pretty tight fade. I'm zooming out and having a listen.
Your love, we will never know how far it goes.
And what I want to show you next, I want to show you using the trimmer tool in shuffle mode. Okay. This is a podcast. And what makes using shuffle mode really cool and necessary is when you're trying to do two things. You're trying to trim the clip, but you're also trying to cut time. And when you're cutting time, you want everything to work like an elastic band. So I'm cutting time, but I also want all the clips to move. So if I'm in regular, I'll explain what that means. If I'm in grid mode and I'm in between two clips and I can break them. So I'm breaking these two clips. My selector is right there. I'm hitting B for blade. I like to think of it as break. And then I'm going to trim this part, and then I'm going to trim this part. And notice nothing moved. Everything is just locked into the timeline, which in most cases is great. But in our case right now, this is going to sound weird. So here it comes.
Paul says, if indeed you have heard him.
So it's going to create all of these chunks of like space, which are just going to be weird. It's going to sound like the room, and then the room is going to disappear.
Paul says, if indeed you
It's
have
going to
heard
get choppy.
him and have been taught by him, as the truth is in Jesus, that you put off.
So it's going to get strange quick. Let me just undo that. So that's typical trimmer mode, which in music, perfect. In audio, I want to delete space because I want to keep the tempo consistent, and I want everything to move with it. So I'll split these again. So I'm going to split these. Cool. And I'm going to put it in shuffle mode and see what happens. So I have this, the top of the song, the top of the radio podcast right here.
This is correct.
And this little bit right here that goes,
This is
and I'll turn that up so everybody can hear it. Here we go.
this is Carter.
So this little click, I want to get rid of it. So I'm going to take the trimmer mode and check out what happens to this audio. Everything moves back.
This is Carter Conlon. The book of
So again, there's this little click right here. I'm going to select that with the selector tool in shuffle mode. And I'm going to delete it. See what happens. See? Everything just snapped. Everything is still together.
the book of Ephesians.
So now it's pretty clean.
This is Carter Conlon. The book of Ephesians, chapter 4, verses 21 to 24. Paul says, "If in
So we can grab the trimmer. Notice how it snaps over.
Paul says, if indeed you have heard him and have been taught by
So there's a little space even right there.
him and have been
So I'm just going to take away that little space.
heard him and have been taught by him, as the truth is in Jesus."
So that's a great example of when we would use shuffle mode with their trimmer tool. I hope you like this tutorial, and don't worry, there'll be an assignment.